What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. I just want to make an extra video here, a little addendum, if you will, to the whole perfect practice session, and just answer a couple simple questions that have been asked. And yes, starting tomorrow, we're going to be doing some technical requirements and the rudiments type stuff with pentatonic scales, the major scale, the harmonic and melodic minor, arpeggios, the whole 9 yards, just to get that on there so people can understand. And that's really the first question. I think someone watched the video and they're like, okay, level 1, what, like 6 months to sort of get this sorted out? Well, listen, if you can learn all the major modes, both as the classical method and 3 notes per string, the harmonic minor and the melodic minor modes, the minor pentatonic, both as sort of your static positions, and also say 3 and 1 and sort of sequences and stuff like that, which we're going to get into. That right there is probably a 2 or 3 year investment, right? And then you have, of course, the triad arpeggios. You have the triads, or more likely the dominant sevenths, as 2-string configuration, as the standard sort of inversions layered over top of the diatonic scale. That's another 2 or 3 years there just to sort of get even moderately good at that stuff. So you're talking for level 1, you're talking maybe a 5 to 7 year investment in terms of education, not 6 months, 5 to 7 years. Right. Level 2 is where you start to incorporate in the sort of music theory and stuff like that. At first, you just learn all the systems and all the forms. Right. By level 2, you're starting to use music theory as the controlling sort of mechanism for how one thing flows to the next. And level 3, of course, is where you just basically take all the rules and throw them out the window. There's a famous scene in a movie called The Forbidden Kingdom with Jackie Chan and Jet Li and some kid or whatever. Of course, they got the ninja masters have to train him up to fight the super powerful warrior and all the rest of that stuff. And there's a scene where essentially they're sitting in this cave and the kid's having a moment. He's like, what if I get my ass kicked and all the rest of the stuff? He's like, don't forget to breathe. But before that, he's actually talking about, you learn all the forms and then you forget them. And that's a part that people don't understand. Is there's a certain amount of rigidity, of course, by just practicing things in the diatonic sort of structure all the time, which is, I wouldn't say it's counterproductive, but your music doesn't quite elevate itself to, the really high quality stuff, because you're always playing it safe. Let's put it that way. So, you have to basically unlearn all of these formulaic sort of approaches. And that, of course, happens at level 3 and whatnot. And level 3, who knows when you're going to get there, because it really depends on the level 2 stuff after you've learned all this information and whatnot. And then you're starting to use the music theory to effectively break down the fretboard in even more creative ways and combine these elements in more creative ways. Well, it could take another 5 years before you start to get to a position where you can just start mixing and matching at will and do it with enough confidence to be able to play along to a backing track or with your band or to some covers or whatever it is. So there it is. You'll know you're at level 3 if you can just put on a piece of music. Like, I'm not talking Dream Theater here, but just some standard pop music from like the 80s or something, when they actually still had musicianship. Let's be real. And you can just sit there and instantly learn the chords, right? And you can just break into a solo or do a fill whenever you want. That's in time and in key with the music. And if you're really skilled, you can start to break it down and be like, oh, it's in this key. And, oh, look, they're doing a modulation, or look, they're doing a lift here, or whatever it is. Oh, this is the pre-chorus. This is the bridge. This is the chorus or the verse. Right, you actually can start to use real music terms to, again, deconstruct a piece of music such that you can now take advantage of it. And I'm not talking about just playing the chords in one position. Oh, look, it's a bunch of open chords. Now, all of a sudden, you're like, well, what happens if I move this root here from the E type or the G type to a C type or an A type, and then play all the chords again, just based around that system or starting position? So it takes a long time. We're talking about a 15 or 20-year investment to go from level 1 all the way up to level 3. And I don't think that that's an unrealistic sort of goal, which is why you have to be disciplined and sort of put your head down. And that's if you're practicing, like, let's be real, like 5 to say 10 hours a week, which, you know, how many people actually have the luxury of doing that? So, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And listen, before people get upset and they're like, well, that's not going to be really required because, you know, music's nowhere near as complex as that is. And that's right. That's true. You're right. They've been successively dumbing music down so that when AI basically hits, nobody's going to notice anything. It'll just be a smooth transition. And if you're not playing at a high enough level, you're just going to get buried because the sheer volume of AI and stuff. And trust me, you watch, you'll see the day. It won't be long, you know, too far off in the future, if you will, where one day you'll fire up Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is, and there'll be some, you know, catchy sort of AI song playing, and some, you know, Josie and the Pussycats kind of AI generated hotties with giant gazongas, you know, twirling around and twerking and stuff like that, fake playing guitar and bass and drums and all the rest of that stuff, and it'll turn into a hit. And that's the moment you'll be like, the transition to the dark side is complete. And that's a lot closer than you think. Think about how many guys basically, right or wrong, if you will, you know, would follow an account on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, that has these AI generated girls and stuff like that. They wear bikinis, or they have, like, you know, candid pics, to the point where the dude making this stuff is making 10K a month. Let that sink in. Like, that's where we're at with respect to the music stuff, which is why this channel exists in the first place. Because I don't want people to not have access to sufficient amount of educational materials to actually play higher order forms of music, to keep that in the hands of human beings. As you can clearly see, they've been trying very hard with AI to be like, don't think for yourself. Don't be inquisitive. Don't ask questions. You know, if you don't know what's going on, just go to an AI sort of chat GPT or Grok or whoever it is and type in your question, and then just consume whatever the answer is that gets thrown out to you. Don't ask follow-up questions. Don't do any research on your own. Look, it may sound altruistic at the beginning, but the AI is only going to give you the answer that it's allowed to give you based on the predilections, if you will, of its creator and the programmers and the people that fund it. And they definitely have their own agenda. And I've already tested this theory. I can tell you that the stuff that AI tells you, now listen, I don't think you need to worry about music, but from a political front, the stuff that AI tells you isn't exactly entirely true. They bend the rules all the time to hide the information that they don't want you to know, while promoting the information they want you to believe, so that they can have more measure of control over your life, your body, and your religious disposition. And I think that is actually sort of a throwback, if you will, to what happened in the late 60s and the 70s and stuff like that. You saw how music was like one of the most powerful tools to end the Vietnam War. And you can pretty much guarantee that everybody else in the establishment saw it too, which is why you see this definitive push towards dumbing music down to the point where it's just, you know, whatever, bimbos twirling around with their assets jiggling all over the place. You saw it again too in the 80s when metal started to take off. There were actually a lot of socially conscious bands, especially in the punk realm. I know it's not metal, but, you know, there's some crossover there, DRI and all this good stuff. And of course, what did they do? Oh, right. They basically started to promote heavily the hair metal stuff, which again gets into debauchery. You ever notice that? As soon as people start making an impact, because music in and of itself is one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal to sway public opinion. You hear a catchy song, you hear some, some truth bombs being dropped. Well, all of a sudden, you hear that repeated amount of times. That can have a devastating effect on the narrative, if you will. And so, of course, the corporate interests move right in, and they just basically start turning people away by the obvious stuff: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You know what I mean? And that's clearly obvious. So that's why it's important to understand and be able to express yourself intelligently on the instrument. It's not to get famous or get rich. I can tell you right now, the chances of you ever doing that are basically nil. You know what I mean? It's just that old sort of paradigm is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Because whatever. I don't know what the reasons are. There's a whole bunch of reasons. But, without sort of taking your music education seriously, you have no chance of anybody actually being engaged by your music in the first place. Like I said, live venues, they're going down in flames. And if you're looking for a perfect analogy, or at least a simile with respect to that, when OF came out, it basically wiped out all the strip clubs. They just died on the operating table. Now, there's always going to be a few clubs because, there's people that are like, this is my scene. All right. But for the overwhelming majority of them, they just closed up shop. And you're starting to see the same thing with dance clubs now, that people are basically like, they either don't have any money, or they're just like, I don't want to go to that place because it's just not fun anymore. I'm old. The kids these days are certainly not really into it, right? And the same thing is happening with the more legacy type venues, where they're just either being bought out because it's prime real estate for places like Live Nation and whatnot. And once the takeover is complete, if you don't have a contract or you're not connected to somebody that's got buddies at Live Nation, you're not playing there. They're trying to corner the market. And so all the smaller venues are just being run out of business. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you went to see an amateur band that was good enough that you'd pay $5 at the door for a cover? Now, when I was young, that happened all the time. And I'm going to tell you a story there. There was one time we went to see a guy's band. It was friends with the guys I was living with. This is way back when I was like in my 20s. Actually, the first time I ever saw a real Music Man Axis, his was purple. And I was just like, that's my dream guitar. And that's why there's a green one back there. You never see it anymore because it's a 6-string. But it was like, I fell in love with that guitar. Killer guitar. Absolutely killer guitar with the quilted maple top and everything. So, damn. But yeah, no, I don't even know if it was an Axis at that point. I mean, I can't remember what the Van Halen one was, but he had the selector switch up here. And so it was the real Van Halen model. But we went to see his band play. I think they were called Planet. And holy smokes, man. We should have given them $10 at the door, because they played covers of bands like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and some metal stuff. And it was better than some of the originals I'd ever seen or heard from the actual band. They were absolutely phenomenal. So they were worth $5 or $10. Last time I went to go see some bands, which was, I think last year, sometime in the fall. It wasn't that they were bad, but they certainly weren't anything to write home to mom about. And honestly, the thing is you could see most people were just sitting there drinking, talking, and sort of not really paying attention to the band, which is ironic because when my friends went up and did it, and they're all old coots like me and stuff like that, but they have a substantive sort of like music background. Nobody was talking and everybody was watching the band. And I couldn't believe it. People were getting up and dancing, if you will, to like Iron Maiden and stuff like that, and Dio that they were rocking. So I was just like, damn, that's the power. That was the moment I realized the power of a truly skilled set of musicians entertaining the crowd, because they can innately sense the difference in quality, if you will. And I'm not trying to disparage anyone. What I'm saying is if you invest the time and the effort into getting pretty good and having good stage presence and picking good songs and stuff like that that are going to be representative and enhance the band's sort of mystique, if you will, whether it's with originals, if you're going to go that route, pretty tough. But, you know, by factoring in some covers, you can kind of shave off, you know, some work, if you will, by people being like, damn, well, that's one of my favorite songs. And then they hear someone do it and they do a great job. They're like, damn. Right. So then they're like, oh, let's check out the originals, which eases the transition to just, you know, move away from covers and just start playing all original stuff. I noticed the difference immediately. And it wasn't because these guys are good looking or anything like that, or they had killer gear, although their gear was great. It was because they were incredibly tight. They knew how to work the crowd. They had a great set list. You know, they were constantly engaging people, and the musicianship was top notch comparably. I mean, the one band didn't even have a solo. Not one solo. Not one. Now, listen, I don't have a problem with stuff like that. There's lots of music I like that doesn't actually have a solo. But, you know, it's pretty hard to sort of sell that stuff when you're at a metal venue. You know what I mean? And that's just it. They played a lot of drop A stuff, which, yeah, it sounded crushingly heavy, and it was pretty cool for the most part. But the lack of a solo, man, it just robs the musician in and of itself of any opportunity to shine and be like the center of attention. I'm not saying you need to go full on George Lynch and be a guitar prima donna, although I'm not trying to imply he's a guitar prima donna. He's absolutely phenomenal player. But you know what I mean? You don't have to be that kind of guy where he's just like, he's a force unto himself. Super shredder of legendary status. What you need to do is basically learn from that experience and be like, you know, if I play my cards right and I do a solo that befits my skill level and I do it in such a way that's engaging to the crowd, obviously you're gonna turn heads, and people are gonna be like, that's a band that I'll go see with my friends next time. And that's exactly what happened. We went to another show later on, and there were easily 2 or 3 times as many people there, and that came from word of mouth. And there were other bands on the venue, and trust me, I watched all of their shows and stuff like that. None of them got the response of the guys that I hang out with, and that's not me patting them on the back or myself on the back being like, we're the best. It just goes to show you the difference in mentality. We were all really serious musicians playing like the hardest music. It was a badge of honor to be able to play things like Disposable Heroes by Metallica or something off Alice in Hell from Annihilator, right? Like the hardest of the hard. Back in those days, it meant something to be able to play some Dream Theater or something like that, to choke through, you know, Under a Glass Moon or whatever it is. Because nobody could do that. At that time, honestly, we were starting to get into the grunge and sort of, you know, the dark times, if you will, of the 90s, where there was like this really awful music scene starting to develop that was just really sappy and terrible. You know, have you ever listened to the radio friendly bands of the time? You're just like Breakfast at Tiffany's or what was that, Hanging by a Thread of a Moment or something. Who knows, you know, like the if you heard the song, you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that from a million years ago. But then you can't remember the name of the band. But you throw in some Van Halen and almost everybody's going to recognize that. Why? Because there's this distinct sort of skill imbalance between this one band and this other band. And that's really all people recognize. And so when you're contemplating, if you will, these levels of the perfect practice session, you're moving from a very structured environment to a structured environment that's driven by music principles, to finally just taking all of that stuff and sort of throwing all the rules out the window and starting to come up with your own sort of distinct brand and flavor, if you will, of music that's inherent to you as a player. So people are like, nobody sounds like him or her or whoever. Instead, it's just this band is truly unique or whatever it is, even if you're just doing the same old that's been done a million times before. And that's a very, very important sort of distinction not a lot of people make these days, and they wonder why they're not getting the forward progress that they so desperately desire. It's not your work ethic, man. It's how you approach music. Your music is boring, predictable, and sort of, been there, done that. It's not even that it's not well played. It's just completely uninspired. Where's the pyrotechnics? As much as people like to be like, it's not important. I can tell you, man, it is important. It's very important. People actually, even though they pretend to hate stuff like that, they still want to be entertained. And that's a big part of the entertainment value, is just watching somebody of, a certain measure of skill absolutely just destroy the fretboard in the appropriate moment, at least once or twice. And you rarely get that anymore. What you hear is tired old licks and basically quasi rip-offs of other famous licks and soloing ideas and all the rest of that stuff. And none of it comes across as overly original. I'm not saying I'm the most original player either. We end up being a collection of our influences and whatnot. But still, overall, I mean, these people can't even break out of the pentatonic scale. And that's my point. When you're doing the practice stuff, it's to start to combine these elements together that you learn at level 1 and then start planning out more sort of methodically at level 2 to get to level 3, where you're now starting to basically manipulate the music at will. You're like, well, this is a perfect opportunity to throw in this killer sort of harmonic minor lick, because we're playing this cool augmented chord here. And I know whenever there's a sharp 5, that's definitely going to be conducive to that. And of course, it's not about playing it at lightning speeds. Just putting it in there in the first place will give you this tiny sliver of an advantage, because people are like, they recognize it, but they're like, that's cool. And their respect for you goes up. That's the whole point of these perfect practice sessions, is to convert you from like an automaton, feed in these cards and stuff, and you just spit out verbatim the information to an actual critical thinker that's a musician that can make real world decisions that will actually benefit the performance and your practice sessions, such that you keep increasing in skill. You can take a simple lower level basic song, if you will, and turn it into something that's truly spectacular, because you have the skill and the chops, if you will, to be able to elevate it. I see that all the time. I saw recently, Andre Nieri do the solo from Burn on Deep Purple. Holy smokes. He didn't just rewrite the solo, man. He just obliterated it. And I was just like, damn. I didn't think you could write a solo in tandem, if you will, with such a universally loved and highly acclaimed track from this legendary band, and then just blow it out of the water. Like, he blew it out of the water with some of the most insane guitar playing I've ever seen. And not only that, it's when you heard the level of shred, it wasn't just awesome. It also wasn't mindless. There was real thought process going in there. So he does these absolutely psychotic diminished runs. I'm just like, guess we got to work a bit more on that, right? And that's just it. You see what I'm saying? Musician that takes it to the next level versus the guy that's going to do a carbon copy ripoff of what Blackmore already did. Right? And granted, that guy doing the Blackmore one will get 1 million views. But all the musicians and stuff like that will be like, that's the guy I want to follow. And really, when the pond keeps shrinking and stuff like that, that's going to be a big part, a big part of what your audience is people that respect music, until the whole AI spell wears off on the general public, and they're like, this isn't as cool as I thought it was, and it's lacking a soul, which of course it is. It's basically the same verbatim crap over and over and over again. People go to the live shows because they want to see a slight variation, or the band just go off the rails, or whatever it is. It's faster, it's slower, it's rearranged, it's turned into a medley, whatever it is. You're never going to get that with AI. Obviously, it just spits out the same song over and over and over again, which isn't too far off from what the pop singers are doing right now. If you see Taylor Swift and this other one, Sabrina Carpenter, or whoever else, every production that they do is exactly the same. It's basically like a Broadway show with them just, wandering around on this massive stage by themselves. There is no real interaction with the band or anything else. It's just them and a whole slew of dancers and maybe some backup singers or whatever it is. The band is pushed back in the back or whatever it is, and I'm sure they're like, this is awesome. I get to basically have a jam session and we have to play some really simple and silly music and stuff like that. I'm making massive bank. But for me personally, that would be like a form of torture. I'd be like, I'm so bored right now. I don't care how much money you're giving me. This is torturous. So, I think I've said my spiel, if you will, with respect to, the extra stuff. And I hope I tried to couch it with some real world examples about why it's important to convert your static practice sessions into dynamic ones where you start to work on actual musical abilities, because that will be the thing that differentiates you. Maybe you'll never be the super shredder. That's fine. There's lots of people that are not super shredders that are incredibly well-respected guitar players. David Gilmour is one, or Mark Knopfler is another one. And there's hundreds of those guys. I'm just choosing two of the most popular. And the fact of the matter is their music is loved. Their solos are revered. And the bottom line is that Mark Knopfler does not sound anything like David Gilmour, even though they kind of inhabit the same sort of sphere. And that should be a big wake-up call for people. The more you develop your own identity and your uniqueness as a musician, the better off you'll be overall, right? So that actually comes from the practice stuff. If you stay and practice hell and just do the sort of like, I'll just grind through the scale shapes again and again and again, without actually trying to get musical about it, without actually trying to mix and match, well, you stagnate and you become basically one of these ultra boring guitar players that, they have skill and stuff like that, but when you listen to them play, it's like, there's something definitively different between this guy who clearly can play and this guy over here who can also play. But when they play, I feel like the music is more inspired and it hits a different way. You don't know what it is. You can't really put your finger on it. But you're like, there's something different. They're both technical, but there's something wrong. And if you're looking for the ultimate example of that, Rusty Cooley, incredible guitar player, like absolutely psychotic shred. Some of the fastest you'll ever see and stuff like that. But he didn't quite connect with the people because there was too much emphasis on speed and shred and stuff like that, and not enough emphasis on the higher order musicianship skills you need, where it's like balancing the shred with more sort of emotive passages where you're using different types of formats like dominant 7 and tension and release and all these good sort of principles. Instead, it was just obliterate the fretboard into utter submission. Right? So that's a prime example, although he's still a huge guitar player, and technically better than, the lion's share of other guitar players. He didn't quite get to legend status because there's this one thing about his playing that most people were like, I can't tell what it is about it, but it doesn't move me like person X over here, or whatever it is. And that's a very good sort of real world example of why it's important to push all the faders up simultaneously. There's the technical aspects, there's the knowledge base with respect to all the different sort of techniques and systems and all the rest of that crap. And then over here, there's this creative side. That's 50% of your actual practice session is practicing being creative. No more canned licks, no more canned or sort of like cookie cutter riffs or soloing ideas or whatever else it is. You're actually working towards developing your mind in real time as you're playing with a piece of music to be like, I'm going to do this right here, right now. And there it is. You just start doing it. Once you start practicing like that, you transfer the practice from this practice sort of sphere into the music sphere. And then, of course, that's when the magic really starts to happen. And if you want to get super technical at that point, then, of course, go nuts. It just takes years and years and years of practice. And, of course, a very, very sort of acute attention to detail with respect to, you know, your technique and all the rest of the stuff. Most of the time, playing fast means you actually have to start slow and literally map out, oh, okay, I'm going to start with an upstroke and do a bunch of downstrokes. Then here's up and then down, down, and stuff like that. Oh, if I'm starting a crazy alternate picking run, I want to start with a downstroke because that makes the most sense for me. Or I have to start with an upstroke. And it's simple little stuff like that that actually makes a huge difference in the long run. Because it starts off being like, oh yeah, I got to keep doing the upstroke here when I'm going to start off with an alternate picking run. And then 5 years down the road, it's just automatic. You always start with an upstroke. In which case, of course, the shred just comes out sounding nice and tight. Again, another hallmark of a killer musician is not only can they play fast, but what they're playing is interesting and it's played in such a way that every note and the actual sequence of notes is instantly definable. It's not just a flurry of notes. It sounds like, what? What's going on there? So there, I'm done. Right. I hope this helps to a certain degree. I know I ran over the line again, but that's why we're doing this extra video, because this stuff is incredibly important. Nobody talks about it, which is why most people never actually grab or seize the golden ring with respect to their music education, because this whole part of it is missing. They're just like, oh, I'll just learn a bunch of scales and stuff like that. Nah, it doesn't quite work that way. So set up your long-term plans, start learning this information, and then learn to unlearn the stuff that you just did and put them together in new and more interesting sort of sequences. And I think you'll find that that is the pathway to prosperity when it comes to learning music and being very proficient on the instrument. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. We'll see you in the next one.